What happens when a duchess meets daytime television's most outspoken panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with the View hosts for what was supposed to be a friendly promotional chat, but quickly spirals into the most explosive confrontation in the show's history. From passive-aggressive pleasantries to full-blown accusations flying across the table, this interview had everything: royal drama, Hollywood hypocrisy, and a walkout that left the studio audience gasping. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these powerhouse personalities clash in ways nobody saw coming. The hot seat was set from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the View stage, her perfectly curated smile masking what would soon become one of the most contentious interviews in daytime television history. The Duchess had arrived to promote her latest Netflix venture, but what the hosts had planned was something entirely different. As she settled into the guest chair, adjusting her cream-colored blazer with calculated precision, there was already an electric tension crackling through Studio 23B. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting in her signature spot at the head of the table, wore her poker face like armor. She'd been in this business long enough to smell controversy from a mile away, and today's guest had brought enough baggage to fill a private jet. The other co-hosts, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin, exchanged subtle glances that spoke volumes about the direction this interview was about to take. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar gravitas that had made her a television institution. "We're here with Meghan Markle, discussing her new documentary series about women's empowerment. But Meghan, I think our audience would be more interested in hearing about your own journey with empowerment, particularly when it comes to speaking your truth versus, well, respecting certain institutions." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's smile never wavered, but those who knew how to read between the lines could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She leaned forward slightly, her media training kicking into high gear. "Thank you for having me, Whoopi. I think it's important to distinguish between speaking truth and speaking responsibly," Meghan replied, her voice measured but with an edge that suggested she wasn't going to be an easy target. "My documentary focuses on elevating voices that have been traditionally marginalized, which I believe is different from some of the sensationalism we see in media today." Joy Behar, never one to let a pointed comment slide, jumped in with her trademark directness. "Speaking of sensationalism, let's talk about your Netflix deal. Some critics say you and Harry have been pretty good at capitalizing on royal drama, while simultaneously asking for privacy. How do you square that circle, Meghan?" The question hit like a verbal slap, and for the first time since sitting down, Meghan's composure showed the tiniest crack. Her laugh was a beat too long, a shade too bright. "I think that's a reductive way to look at our work, Joy. We've been very intentional about the stories we choose to tell and the platforms we use to tell them. When you've lived through what we've lived through, you realize that silence isn't always protection. Sometimes it's complicity." "Complicity in what exactly?" Sunny Hostin interjected, her prosecutorial background evident in the way she phrased the question. "Because from the outside looking in, it seems like you've had plenty of platforms to share your perspective. Multiple interviews, podcasts, books, documentaries. At what point does sharing your truth become, well, oversharing?" The temperature in the studio seemed to rise several degrees. Meghan's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her water glass, and her smile began to look more like a grimace. "I find it interesting, Sunny, that when other public figures share their experiences, particularly white, male public figures, it's called memoir writing or storytelling. But when I do it, it's oversharing." "Oh, so now we're making this about race." Alyssa Farah Griffin chimed in, her voice sharp with skepticism. "Meghan, I think what my colleagues are trying to get at is the apparent contradiction between wanting privacy and being very public about very private family matters. You can't have it both ways." The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond a typical promotional interview. Meghan's jaw tightened visibly, and for the first time since the interview began, her careful media facade started to slip. "Alyssa, I think you're misunderstanding the fundamental difference between choosing your narrative and having it chosen for you." Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly. "The British tabloid press wrote about me for years without my consent. often with blatant inaccuracies and, yes, racist undertones. So when I finally had the opportunity to set the record straight, I took it. That's not contradiction, that's survival. Sarah Haynes, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine curiosity but carried its own sting. But Meghan, don't you think there's something to be said for the dignity of silence? I mean, the royal family has dealt with scandals and controversies for decades without airing everything publicly. There's a certain grace in handling things privately, isn't there? The word grace seemed to hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her eyes flashed. With something dangerous, and the careful mask she'd been wearing since arriving began to crumble in real time. Grace, Meghan repeated, her voice low but loaded with barely contained fury. Sarah, I want you to imagine being told that you need to show grace while people are literally making up stories about you, while they're questioning your child's skin color before he's even born, while they're driving you to the point where you're having thoughts of self-harm. Tell me, what does grace look like in that situation? The studio fell into stunned silence. This wasn't the polished, diplomatic Meghan Markle they'd expected. This was someone who had clearly reached her limit, and the hosts were beginning to realize they may have pushed harder than they'd intended. Whoopi, sensing the interview was spiraling into dangerous territory, attempted to regain control. Meghan, I think we can all agree that what you went through was difficult, but no. Whoopi, Meghan interrupted, her voice now carrying a steel that cut through the studio like a blade. I don't think you can all agree. I think some of you are sitting here right now, on national television, essentially telling me that I should have stayed quiet while lies were being told about me and my family. And frankly, that's exactly the kind of thinking that perpetuates the systems we claim to want to change. The confrontation had shifted into uncharted territory, and everyone in the studio could feel it. But this was only the beginning, and what was about to unfold would make these opening salvos look like friendly conversation. Joy Behar, never one to back down from a fight, decided to double down on the attack. Meghan, let's be real here. You knew what you were signing up for when you married into the royal family. It's not like the scrutiny was a surprise. And now you're sitting here, making millions off of talking about how terrible it all was. Some people might call that having your cake and eating it too. The words hit Meghan like a physical slap, and something inside her snapped. Her perfectly composed facade cracked wide open, revealing a raw fury that had been simmering just beneath the surface. Having my cake and eating it too, she repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. Joy, are you seriously sitting there suggesting that I should be grateful for the racism, the death threats, the lies printed about me daily? Nobody's saying you should be grateful, Whoopi interjected, but her tone had shifted from diplomatic to defensive. But you have to admit, Meghan, that you've done pretty well for yourself since leaving the royal family. The Netflix deals, the Spotify contracts, the best-selling books. You've turned your pain into profit, and some people find that problematic. The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. Meghan's eyes went wide with disbelief, and for a moment, she looked genuinely stunned that these women who had built their own careers on speaking out against injustice, were essentially telling her to shut up and be grateful. Problematic. Meghan's voice rose to a pitch that made everyone in the studio shift uncomfortably. Whoopi, I expected better from you. You of all people should understand what it's like to be a woman of color in spaces where you're not wanted, where every move you make is scrutinized and criticized. But here you are, suggesting that I should have just taken it quietly. Sunny Hostin, her legal instincts kicking in, leaned forward aggressively. Meghan, nobody's suggesting you should have taken anything quietly. But there's a difference between standing up for yourself and what you've done. You've aired private family conversations, made serious accusations without providing evidence, and frankly, you've damaged relationships that could have been repaired privately. Evidence. Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp. Sunny, what evidence would satisfy you? Should I have recorded every conversation? Should I have taken photos of every slight, every microaggression? The fact that you're even asking for evidence shows exactly how little you understand about what I went through. Alyssa Farah Griffin, sensing blood in the water, pressed her advantage. But Meghan, you made some pretty serious accusations in your interview with Oprah. Accusations about racism within the royal family. Don't you think if you're going to make claims like that, You should be prepared to back them up with more than just your word. The question was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. Meghan's face flushed with anger, and her voice took on a dangerous edge that made everyone in the studio take notice. My word, she repeated slowly, each syllable dripping with venom. Alyssa, are you suggesting that I'm lying about experiencing racism? Are you seriously sitting there, questioning whether a biracial woman experienced racism from an institution that has a documented history of racist behavior? I'm not questioning whether you experienced racism. Alyssa shot back, but her tone suggested otherwise. I'm questioning whether you've been completely honest about the context and the specifics. Because frankly, some of your claims don't hold up under scrutiny. The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating, and the cameras captured every micro-expression, every tightened jaw, every flash of anger in Meghan's eyes. Sarah Haynes, perhaps trying to play peacemaker but only making things worse, jumped in with what she probably thought was a reasonable question. Meghan, I think what we're all struggling with is the timing. You left the royal family, you got your freedom, you got your voice back. But then you keep talking about it. At some point, don't you think it's time to move on? The question was the final straw. Meghan's composure didn't just crack, it shattered completely. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes blazing with a fury that made everyone at the table instinctively lean back. Move on, she hissed. Sarah, how exactly do you move on from trauma? How do you move on from having your mental health ignored, from being told that your feelings don't matter, from having your biracial identity used as a weapon against you? Please, enlighten me, because I would love to know the magic formula for just getting over institutional racism. Joy Behar, apparently deciding that diplomatic immunity was off the table, fired back with both barrels. Meghan, you keep throwing around the word trauma like it's a shield. But trauma doesn't give you the right to hurt other people, and that's exactly what you've done. You've hurt your father-in-law, you've hurt your husband's family, and you've hurt the institution that made you who you are today, made me who I am. Meghan's voice was now loud enough that the studio audience could hear every word clearly. Joy, that institution didn't make me anything. I was already successful, already accomplished, already building my own career and my own life. They didn't give me anything except pain and a front row seat to their dysfunction. Whoopi, realizing the interview was completely out of control, tried once more to regain the narrative. Meghan, I think what Joy is trying to say is that with great privilege comes great responsibility. And you had privilege, you had a platform, you had resources, you had opportunities that most people can only dream of. Privilege. Meghan's voice cracked with disbelief. Whoopi, you're talking about privilege while I'm telling you about being suicidal. You're talking about opportunities while I'm explaining how I was silenced, how I was told I couldn't get help, how I was essentially held prisoner in a system that was designed to break me. The raw emotion in her voice was undeniable, but instead of generating sympathy, it seemed to only fuel the host's determination to press their attack. Sunny Hostin, her voice sharp with legal precision, delivered what felt like a closing argument. Meghan, here's what I think happened. I think you went into that family with expectations that weren't realistic. I think you expected to change a 1,000-year-old institution to suit your needs. And when that didn't happen, you decided to burn it all down. And now you're sitting here, playing the victim, when really you're the one who walked away from responsibility. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Meghan sat frozen for a moment, her face cycling through emotions so quickly it was hard to keep track. Hurt, anger, disbelief, and finally, something that looked like cold, calculated rage. Playing the victim, she repeated, her voice now deadly quiet. Sunny, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. Because what you're essentially arguing is that I should have stayed in a situation that was destroying my mental health, endangering my child, and systematically erasing my identity, because leaving would be irresponsible. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath as Meghan continued, her voice growing stronger and more dangerous with each word. You're all sitting here, successful women who have built careers on speaking truth to power, telling me that I should have stayed silent while powerful people try to silence me. You're telling me that I should have prioritized an institution's reputation over my own survival. And you're doing it on national television, in front of millions of people. She paused, her eyes scanning each face at the table with laser precision. But here's what you're really doing. You're perpetuating the exact same system that tried to break me in the first place. You're telling women, particularly women of color, that their pain doesn't matter as much as maintaining the status quo. And that, ladies, is exactly why nothing ever changes. The words hit the table like an atomic bomb, and suddenly, everyone was talking at once. But Meghan wasn't finished, and what she was about to say next would push this confrontation past the point of no return. Enough. Meghan's voice cut through the chaos like a sword, silencing the entire studio instantly. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. I came here thinking I was going to have a conversation with fellow women, with people who understood what it meant to fight for justice and equality. Instead, I find myself being interrogated by people who apparently think that speaking out against racism and institutional abuse is somehow wrong. Whoopi tried to interject. Meghan, nobody said that dash. No. Whoopi, you don't get to talk right now. Meghan snapped, her voice carrying an authority that none of them had expected. You've all had your say, now it's my turn. You want to know what's really problematic? What's problematic is sitting at a table with women who have built entire careers on being outspoken, on challenging systems, on speaking truth to power. And then having those same women turn around and tell me that I should have stayed quiet when those systems were destroying me. She began pacing behind her chair, her movements sharp and predatory. The studio audience was completely captivated, some recording with their phones despite security protocols. Joy, you've spent decades making jokes about politicians, calling out hypocrisy, and never once worrying about whether you were being diplomatic enough. But somehow, when I call out racism in the royal family, I'm the problem. Meghan's laugh was harsh and bitter. The double standard is absolutely breathtaking. Joy Behar's face was flushed with anger. Meghan, there's a difference between political commentary and airing private family business on international television. Private family business. Meghan whirled around to face her directly. Joy, they made my life public business the moment I started dating Harry. Every single detail of my existence became fodder for public consumption. They dissected my family history, my past relationships, my career, even my choice of nail polish. But when I finally defend myself, suddenly I'm crossing a line. Sunny Hostin, her voice tight with frustration, jumped back in. Meghan, you're being deliberately obtuse. There are ways to handle family conflicts without going nuclear. You could have dash, I could have what, Sunny? Meghan interrupted, her eyes blazing. I could have continued to let them leak stories about me to the press while I stayed silent. I could have let them paint me as the angry black woman while they positioned themselves as the victims. I could have let my son grow up thinking that his mother was too weak to defend herself. She moved closer to the table, her presence suddenly intimidating in a way that made all the hosts shift uncomfortably. Let me tell you something about your precious dignity of silence, Sarah. Silence is what allows systems of oppression to continue unchallenged. Silence is what lets racist institutions maintain their power while their victims suffer in private. You want to talk about grace? There's nothing graceful about allowing injustice to continue because it's more comfortable for everyone else. Sarah. Haynes looked genuinely shaken. Meghan, I never said dash. You didn't have to say it explicitly. Meghan cut her off. It was implied in every single question, every raised eyebrow, every suggestion that I somehow brought this on myself or that I should have handled it differently. You've all been sitting here for the past 20 minutes essentially arguing that I should have prioritized other people's comfort over my own survival. Alyssa Farah Griffin, perhaps realizing how badly this was going, tried a different approach. Meghan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not trying to silence you or dismiss your experiences. We're just trying to understand dash. No. Alyssa, you're not trying to understand anything. Meghan's voice was ice cold now. You're trying to justify your preconceived notions about me. You came into this interview with your minds already made up, and nothing I could say was going to change that. You've decided that I'm the villain in this story, and you're determined to make that narrative stick. She grabbed her purse from beside her chair, the movement sharp and decisive. But here's what you're all missing. You're so focused on whether I handled things the right way that you're completely ignoring the fact that I shouldn't have had to handle any of it in the first place. A biracial woman shouldn't have to prove that she experienced racism. A pregnant woman shouldn't have to beg for mental health support. A mother shouldn't have to fight to protect her child from institutional prejudice. Whoopi made one final attempt to regain control. Meghan, please, let's just take a breath and dash. No. Whoopi, I'm done taking breaths. I'm done being diplomatic. I'm done pretending that this conversation is happening in good faith. Meghan's voice rose to fill the entire studio. You want to know what the real problem is? The real problem is that women like you, women who should be allies, who should understand what it's like to be marginalized and dismissed, are the ones perpetuating the very systems that tried to destroy me. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Whoopi's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally, cold fury. You know what, Meghan? Whoopi's voice was dangerously quiet. You want to talk about systems? You want to talk about privilege? You walked into one of the most privileged positions in the world, and instead of using that platform to make things better, you burned it all down and then demanded that everyone feel sorry for you. That's not activism. That's selfishness. The studio erupted. The audience gasped audibly. The other hosts looked stunned, and Meghan's face went completely white with rage. Selfishness? She repeated, her voice barely controlled. Whoopi, protecting my mental health is selfish? Defending my son is selfish? Refusing to let racist institutions define my worth is selfish? What's selfish? Whoopi shot back, is expecting the entire world to revolve around your trauma while you profit from it. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, the entire studio was frozen in shocked silence. Then Meghan's face transformed into something none of them had ever seen before, a mask of pure, undiluted fury mixed with profound disappointment. Profit from my trauma, she repeated slowly, each word dripping with venom. You know what, Whoopi? You're absolutely right. I should have stayed quiet. I should have let them destroy me in silence. I should have let my son grow up in a world where his mother was too afraid to defend herself. Because God forbid a woman of color should dare to speak her truth and expect to be believed. She slung her purse over her shoulder with a sharp, decisive movement. But here's the thing. I'm not going to apologize for surviving. I'm not going to apologize for refusing to be silenced. And I'm certainly not going to apologize for building a life and a career on my own terms after escaping a system that was designed to break me. She moved toward the edge of the set, her movements quick and purposeful. You want to know what's really tragic about this conversation? It's that 5 successful women who have overcome their own challenges and built their own platforms, chose to use those platforms to tear down another woman instead of supporting her. You've proven exactly why institutions like the royal family continue to get away with their behavior, because even their victims' potential allies would rather blame the victim than challenge the system. Joy Behar, apparently unable to let it go, called out after her. Meghan, you can't just walk away from a conversation because you don't like how it's going. Meghan stopped dead in her tracks and turned around slowly, her eyes burning with an intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. Watch me, she said simply. With that, she turned on her heel and walked straight off the set, her heels clicking authoritatively against the studio floor. The camera followed her until she disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a stunned audience and a panel of hosts who suddenly realized they had just witnessed something unprecedented. The studio fell into complete silence except for the mechanical hum of the cameras. Whoopi stared at the empty chair where Meghan had been sitting, her face cycling through a range of emotions. The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly unsure of what had just happened or whether they had pushed too far to die in the audience. Phones were buzzing with notifications as clips of the confrontation began spreading across social media at lightning speed. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of shock, excitement, and the uncomfortable realization that they had all just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning, and everyone in that studio knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again.